Welcome to the second module, Supply and Demand, Part 1. And in this module, we're going to be talking about the basics of economics, the cornerstone of economics, supply and demand. In this first lecture, we're going to focus on building the demand curve. So we're going to be talking a lot about the consumer side of things and thinking about how consumers make the decisions on which goods and services they should purchase. And so going back to our circular flow diagram, what we're going to see is that we're going to focus on that product market. So our product market is what we're concerned with down here. We know that that's where households go to buy the goods and services that they consume. That's where businesses go to sell the goods and services that they've produced. So to start off, we know that households are going to be the demanders. They're the ones that want to purchase those items in the product market. And so we're starting off on the demand side. And the next set of lectures, in lecture 3 and 4, we're going to be talking about the supply side, and we're going to be talking about the businesses that produce those products and bring them to the goods and service market in terms of supply. All right, so when we're thinking about markets, I first want to just define what we mean by a market. And a market can mean a lot of different things. So it can be a very localized market. So it could be like our local farmers market that happens down on Main Street. Or we could talk about a national market. So we could be thinking about something like the stock market that happens at a more national or even international level. So markets don't just have to be with the people that surround us locally, but also can take place on a worldwide scale. A market can also be face-to-face, so you can directly deal with the person you're purchasing the product from, or it could be that you never meet the seller of the product. And so markets can not only happen on a face-to-face basis, but also over the internet, over the phone, something like that. So keep in mind that markets are a wide variety. They include a wide variety of individuals, and we're going to talk a little bit about those markets as we're moving through. But in terms of from our previous module, I want you to think about markets in terms of those perfectly competitive markets. So we're going to assume that we have a perfectly competitive market. We don't have differentiation of products. We don't have a monopoly with only one seller or very few sellers like an oligopoly, but we have a large number of sellers all selling a very similar product. And what this means is that they're going to have to take the price that the market determines as given. They were price takers. And we're going to see what that means as we move forward and talk about supply and demand and the interactions. So when we're thinking about demand, remember, we're thinking about consumers and how much of a product they want to consume. And so we're going to present it as both a schedule or a chart, and then also as a curve. We're going to graph it out. And our definition of demand is a two-part demand. Consumers are willing and able to purchase the product at the given price. And so this is incredibly important that people both have to have the preference to want to purchase the product and also have the ability to purchase the product. So we can't actually demand a good unless we are both willing and able to purchase this product. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and get into the willingness and ability as we start to go through some examples. All right, so we can look at demand then at the individual level. So what's your willingness to pay for each unit? So what's your willingness to pay for your first cup of coffee? What if you said a second cup of coffee, a third, a fourth, a fifth? What is your willingness to pay for each unit? Or we can start to look at, okay, what if I charged you $5 for a coffee? Would you purchase the product? How many would you purchase? And we can think about it in terms of how many we would purchase at each price. We could also think about demand at the market level. So how much coffee is demanded by society at a price of $5? And so we're going to look at each of these individually and kind of bring them together so we really understand what is demand and what does that mean for our demand curve. All right, so let's think about the new iPhone 7. So how much would you be willing to pay for an iPhone 7? I want you to think about that number right now. So if I told you I had an iPhone 7 for sale, brand new, how much are you willing to pay for that iPhone 7? Hopefully we all have a price. This is what we call your willingness to pay. that's what you are willing to pay. Hopefully you also have the ability to pay that amount. So hopefully you have that money stored up, or you can come up with some sort of way of funding that. But this is your willingness to pay. This is how much you are willing to pay for this phone. So what if I told you I would sell you this phone for $200? So some of you might say, oh, that is so great, because I said I was willing to pay $400 for this phone. You're only going to charge me $200. That's a great deal. Other of you might have said, well, I only have $150, and so I'm not going to be able to afford this phone. And so you're just not in the market right now. And then finally, there's some of you who are never going to be willing to buy that iPhone. Some of you who just are, I don't want that iPhone. I have no willingness. So it's both talking and thinking about the ability. So if you don't have the $200 to fund this iPhone, then you're not going to be one of the people that get the iPhone. And then also the willingness. If you never want to purchase the product, you're not going to be in the market. Or if you're not willing to spend that amount of money on the phone, then you're just not in the market. Okay, and so we can start to compare our willingness to pay to the price, and we're going to come up with what we call in economics a consumer surplus. We're going to talk about this briefly in this module, but we're really going to hammer home the idea of consumer surplus in the final lecture 6. All right, so let's assume 3 individuals. Again, John has a willingness to pay for this iPhone of $500. Billy has a willingness to pay and an ability to pay of only $150. And Emily said she would never purchase an iPhone. She has a willingness to pay of $0. All right, so if the iPhone costs $200, how happy are these individuals? Well, John is very happy because he buys the iPhone and he still has $300 that he would have given me to purchase the iPhone. So he's $300 extra happy is what we would say. He's got $300 extra happiness built in there. Billy would not purchase the iPhone. He has no desire to purchase the iPhone for $200. He has the willingness to pay of $150. So he is just not going to purchase the iPhone unless I ever drop the price to $150 or less. And then finally, Emily's also not in the market right now because she is not willing to purchase that iPhone. So she has no desire to purchase the iPhone. She's not going to be in the market. Again, remember, we're talking about willingness and ability. So John has the willingness, he has the ability, he is the one that gets the iPhone. Billy doesn't have either the willingness or ability to pay that $200, so he's not in the market. And Emily just has no preference to ever purchase the iPhone, so she's not in the market. All right, so again, when we're thinking about demand, it's incredibly important to think about both their willingness to pay. So what will that consumer pay for the product, and also their ability to pay for the product. And this is where we get into consumer surplus. The definition of consumer surplus is the benefit surplus received by the consumer, or we can look at it at a market level, all of the consumers in the market. So when we're looking at John was willing to pay $500 for that iPhone, but he only had to pay $200. And so he had consumer surplus of $300. It's the difference, the consumer surplus is the difference between the maximum price a consumer is willing to pay, or that willingness to pay for a product, and the actual price that they do. So we take the difference between that amount, and that's, I like to call it the extra happiness, the happiness that I get from getting a good deal. That's consumer surplus. All right, so let's keep thinking about demand. So suppose we're hanging out at a coffee shop with our friends. How much would you be willing and able to pay for your first cup of coffee? If you don't drink coffee, think about maybe a soda, or maybe you're at the local watering hole and you're drinking a beer, or whatever your preference is. But what is your willingness to pay for your first cup of coffee? Okay, and then what about that second cup of coffee? And then your third cup of coffee. As we continue to purchase the product, or as we continue to think about additional units, what we're going to find is that the amount that we're willing to pay starts to decrease. Okay, so we might be willing to pay $5 for our first cup of coffee, but then by the time we get to our third cup of coffee, our third latte, we're only willing to pay $1. The extra benefit we get I start to get full, right? Or I start to get hyped up on caffeine. Maybe I'd rather have a water instead of my third latte. So the willingness that I have to pay starts to decrease. All right, so let's create the individual demand schedule from this information. So how many coffees are demanded, and we're going to say on a weekly basis for this individual. Okay, so what we can see here is the different price levels and then the different levels of quantity. So if the price of the coffee is $5, this individual is willing to consume 2 cups of coffee. Willing and able to consume 2 cups of coffee. As we start to lower the price, the amount of coffee, the quantity of coffee that I demand starts to increase, right? I'm getting a better deal, and so I'm willing to consume more coffee. And also, as I start to consume more coffee, right, my willingness to pay starts to fall. And so both of those are taken into account when we start to look at this demand schedule. So as the price of coffee decreases, the quantity demanded is going to increase. We can also then graph our schedule here on a plot. So if the price is $5, the quantity demanded is 2. So price is always going to be on that vertical axis and quantity always on the horizontal. So whenever you set up a supply and demand curve, you should always have price on the vertical and quantity on the horizontal. All right, then at $4, so when the price goes to $4, we know that we then are willing and able to consume 3 cups of coffee. And then at $3, we're willing to consume 4 cups, and at $2, we're willing to consume 5 cups. And we can connect these points, and this is our demand curve. And so this is for our individual. So we have an individual demand curve, and we can see what is the willingness and ability for an individual to consume coffee at all of these different prices. We can then also think about the market demand. And the market demand is going to be the sum of all consumers in the market. So we're going to take up your demand for coffee, my demand for coffee, and everybody in Columbia who wants coffee. And we're going to add up all of their individual demands on a weekly basis. And we're going to find, and I did this in hundreds, so at $5, there's 400 coffees that are going to be demanded. As that price starts to decrease, again, the quantity demanded will begin to increase. And so now we're looking at that market level. So all of the individuals in the market, we've added up all of their individual demands, and now we can determine, okay, this is the market demand for coffee. And we're going to graph this in a very similar manner. So I just extended those a bit, but at a price of $5, there's 400 coffees demanded. At a price of $4, there's 600 coffees demanded. At $3, it's 800, and at $2, it's 1,000. And we can connect that, and now we have the market demand. Okay, what I want you to really pay attention to is the fact that as the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. And so there's this inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price. And this is because consumers like low prices. We want the price of those products to be low. All right, so we have what we call the law of demand, and we're going to really break down this statement. But other things equal, as the price falls, the quantity demanded for a good will rise. And as the price rises, the quantity demanded for the good falls. All right, so let's start to break this down and really look at what does the law of demand tell us. So first off, this other things equal assumption. The other things equal assumption is that nothing else in our economy is changing. It's only that the price of this product is changing. So as we were looking at, as we were building that demand curve, we were assuming that the only thing in the economy changed was that the price of coffee went from $5 to $4. That's the only thing that changed. Nobody all of a sudden decided that, oh, I love coffee and I didn't yesterday. Or nobody decided, well, I'm just going to charge my workers higher wages. Or there's nothing else changing in the economy. Everything else is staying exactly the same. It's only the price that's adjusting. Okay, and as we talk about the price, it's only the price of that individual good. So it's only the price of coffee that's adjusting, either falling or increasing. It's no other goods in the economy. And that's going to then cause us to change the quantity that we want to consume. It changes the amount of willingness and ability consumers have towards that product. And so we can think about that, go back to the iPhone example where we had those three individuals. And let's say I did decrease my price and I said, I'm not going to charge $200, I'm going to charge $100. Well, now all of a sudden it's not just John in the market, but our next individual also enters in, and I can't remember his name. I think it was Billy. He enters into the market. He had a willingness to pay $50, and now all of a sudden he enters into the market. So there's some individuals that will enter into the market because of that lower price, and some individuals will consume more because of that lower price. So what we see here is that it's showing us the willingness and ability of consumers has changed based on the change in price. And the important takeaway is that price and quantity demanded are inversely related. So this is why we have that downward slope to demand. We have a downward slope in our demand curve because price and quantity are inversely related. Consumers like low prices. At low prices, the amount that they're going to demand is going to increase. And so that's the important takeaway. All right, so as we continue to talk about demand, I want you to keep these things in mind.